The Perinatal Mental Health Team at Transformation Partners in Health and Care have created a series of podcasts that focus on perinatal mental health. The perinatal period is usually defined as the time between conceiving a baby and 1 to 2 years after giving birth. We know that during this time, around 1 in every 5 women will experience mental health problems, which may begin in pregnancy, during pregnancy, or in the postnatal period. Perinatal mental health is different for everyone, and people can be affected in many ways. It can often be difficult to recognise the worsening symptoms in the busy days of parenthood. Getting the right help, support, and guidance is vital, but we know that sometimes it can be hard to know where to find it and how to access it. We understand the importance of beginning and continuing conversations around perinatal mental health. By raising awareness of the impact that perinatal mental health problems can have for women, birthing people and their families, and also showing the effect that the right care can have, we hope that we will be able to reach more people, challenge perceptions, and change attitudes towards accessing help. In this episode, we are going to be discussing birth trauma and experiences of the Neonatal Intensive Care Unit, as well as how the Perinatal Mental Health Team can support the grief process. We are joined by Honey Attridge. Honey will be sharing her experience of when her daughter Sophie was in the NICU after birth, how she navigated both the physical and mental side of this journey, and offers advice to parents who may be going through the same thing. Honey now works as a peer support worker in maternal mental health services. We are also joined again by the wonderful Chelsea. Chelsea is the mother of 2 young girls, a military wife, worked as a midwife for 3 years, and now works as a lived experience practitioner for Transformation Partners in Health and Care. And me, Meghan Mathieson, Strategic Communications Manager at TPHC, and mother of a little girl born during the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic. As you listen to our chat today, you may feel you identify and relate to what we are discussing and want to find support. We encourage you to use our website to find support that is local to you. TPHC is not a crisis service, and so in the first instance, we would encourage you to contact your GP, midwife, or local services to support you. So, hello to Honey, and thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us and share your experiences. Do you want to start by telling us a little bit about what happened to you and your daughter Sophie?
Yeah, hi everyone. So my name's Honey and my daughter Sophie is now 3.5. And my story starts when I gave birth to her. So I'd had a wonderful pregnancy. I was really excited. And I remember feeling that as long as she's okay, everything will be fine. And that was kind of my mindset before going in, really. So yeah, it was a really, really difficult and terrifying birth, unfortunately. It was a very long labour. There were some interventions that I hadn't expected and didn't know much about. And my labour just wasn't progressing. I was very tired. I was very scared. I didn't feel like people were giving me much information, and I had this feeling that something wasn't quite right. And as the time went on and I wasn't progressing, I just became exhausted. I wanted to speak to somebody. I wanted to understand what was happening, why it was taking so long. And eventually, I was offered an epidural, and that took the pain away. And after that, I started progressing a bit more, and my labour lasted around about 36 hours. And by that point, the midwife said, okay, you're going to get to the pushing stage now, prepare yourself. And I thought, oh, wow, I've done it. This is the pushing stage. It's the final bit. I'm going to have my baby really soon. I got really excited. I remember asking my husband to get me something sugary to give me some energy to go. And everything just suddenly changed. the atmosphere changed. More people came into the room, and I was rushed down to theatre. And then once I got to theatre, you know, all the bright lights, the noises, people asking, throwing questions at me. And I just remember this kind of urgency and this feeling of being out of control and really, really scared. And what had happened was that I had birthed my daughter's head, but her shoulder had got stuck. So it's called shoulder dystocia. And that means that it's an emergency situation and there will always be some assistance getting out. So it was a forceps delivery, emergency forceps delivery. And when she was born, she wasn't breathing. I remember kind of it being very silent and not knowing what's going on. You expect to hear that kind of cry and expect that cuddle, and it just didn't come. I was really hoping for some skin to skin. I was hoping to see her. I was hoping that this was just this was not happening. This isn't happening. You know, she's going to be okay. She's going to be okay. But kind of the longer we waited and the more that the silence was there, I just knew that something was really, really wrong. And so she was rushed away and she was put into special care. At the time, I didn't know where she'd gone. And I was told that she was a girl. I knew she was a girl. And I was told that I'd be able to see her soon. I unfortunately suffered some physical damage, some physical injuries. And so I needed to kind of be stitched up and sent to high dependency before I could see her. And I'd picked up an infection, so I needed some antibiotics. And so it was a really long time before I got to see her. And I found that really unsettling, really scary, because I didn't know where she was and I didn't know if she was okay. And I remember begging one of the nurses to please let me see her, please, please. And I remember her turning to me and saying, you need to finish your antibiotics and then we'll take you up. And I just wanted to see her. Like I couldn't obviously move or walk because I'd had the epidural. I was in kind of in bed having my drip going, and I just wanted to see her. I just wanted to see that she was alive. And I remember just crying and begging somebody to please just let me, please, can I just go and see her? And so eventually I went up to see her, and she was just kind of laying there, and I was desperate to hold her, but I was told that I shouldn't. And I didn't really know what to do. I just felt kind of a little bit lost as to what on earth just happened. What on earth has just happened? And I thought to myself, my husband and I both said, wow, that was a really bad labour, but at least she's okay. And we kind of relaxed a little bit. And when I was cuddling and holding her later on and trying to feed her, she just stopped breathing. She turned blue and was having some kind of seizure. And she was again rushed away, and I just didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know. I just didn't know. I had no idea. I thought the worst. I thought, oh my gosh, you know, has she died? I just didn't know. And she was in special care and she was being intubated, and there was just a team of people all around her, and she was just lying there very helpless, and this tiny little baby being surrounded by all of these people, and I just was kind of rooted to the spot. I didn't know what to do. And eventually I was told that she'd suffered some kind of brain injury due to the birth, but they didn't know what, and they didn't know how bad it was. That's all I was told. And then a couple of hours later, they said she needs to go to a higher grade Neonatal Intensive Care Unit, and that she would be transferred as soon as possible and they would take over her care. So yeah, that's our story. I'll talk about the NICU later on, and I'll talk about some other things that happened, but that's basically our story. That was the birth trauma, and that's what happened afterwards. And yeah, it was a scary time.
Honey, I think I think the first thing to say is thank you so much for sharing that with us, being brave enough to share that with us, and speaking about it so clearly and so calmly and beautifully, and letting us into one of the most traumatic moments of your life. So thank you so much for that. And I can imagine at the time you felt incredibly alone and scared. And I guess Chelsea might want to come in here. But it would be I think it would be interesting to know and to hear about when the issue of it being a traumatic birth and birth trauma came to you, because I think people often talk about births and what happened to them, but I think, exactly as you alluded to, as long as she's okay, as long as Sophie's all right, we'll be fine. But actually it's not, because it's something that you have to live with. And so I wonder if you would be able to share a bit about that, when you started to process it and realize what happened and how you felt about it.
I'll just jump in before we let Honey go to that. Honey and I have a very close relationship, and yeah, every time I hear your story, there's different emotions that come to me. So like Meg said, thank you so much for sharing that. I know you as Sophie's mom go back to that place, but even myself as a mom, I can feel it in your story. And anybody listening to that would have said, that's a really traumatic birth. And it is the point, you probably did have people say, at least she's okay, but we'll talk about this a bit later of what that kind of experience does to your mind and body. And it was definitely part of your recovery, if I'm right, that you kind of acknowledged the way the neonatal experience and the birth affected the way you think and the way you parent after that. Is that correct, Honey?
Yeah, absolutely. And essentially it was a birth trauma, but I found the NICU experience just as traumatic as the birth itself. And I think people have trouble understanding that. And I think that's because unless you've actually been a parent with a very, very unwell baby, you can't actually step into anyone's shoes. And even though I try to explain what it's like, you can't really understand it. And I've spoken to lots of NICU parents, and they've all said, oh, you just get it or you don't get it. And it's just a really kind of intense environment. And the way that I think about it now, when I think of kind of what a very strange environment it is, in that it's kind of, you imagine a normal hospital ward, and then imagine it being a lot smaller, no windows, and a very, very hot room, obviously for the very small and unwell babies. And then you add another layer of machines. There's machines everywhere, and they're doing all different jobs. And there are so many machines on just your one baby. And I didn't understand what they were or what they were for or what they were doing for her. And I was very lucky. And I will say this, anytime anybody asks me, the staff on that ward were absolutely second to none. They were incredible. So everything that I say about this experience is coming from a parent's perspective and not the care that my daughter received, because it was absolutely amazing. And one of the lovely nurses came round and she showed me what each machine was and what it was doing for her. And that really helped me to understand why she needed all of this intervention. And I would say for any parent on the NICU, just ask what the machines are for, because that really helped me to process. So I knew that this was the feeding tube and this was the antibiotics medication, or et cetera, and that was really helpful. And I think when you're first introduced to the NICU, you're very aware that there are other families going through all of this, and there are other very sick babies, but you're just kind of very focused on your baby. And for us, it was very much, we didn't know what was wrong with her. It took about 6 days for us to get a diagnosis. And that diagnosis was that she'd had a stroke due to the pulling of the forceps at the birth. But during those 6 days, you know, we didn't know whether she was going to survive. We didn't know if this was going to cause her any kind of problem in the future. We just didn't know. We just had no idea, and nobody could reassure us that she was going to be okay, because they didn't know what had actually happened. So it was a really uncertain time, and it was a very, very frightening time. I remember looking at her in that bed, and I didn't recognize her. I could have looked at her and she could have been anyone's baby, because her whole face was just covered. It was covered in bandages, it was covered in tubes, and I could barely see a part of her face. And that for me was a real shock. I expected to go in and be able to touch her, and you can't really do that. And that's a really horrible place to be, because I'm her mum, and I should be the person cuddling her, touching her, telling her she's okay, and all of those things are just taken away. They're completely taken away from your control. I can't just pick her up whenever I feel like it. I can't let her just sleep on my chest. And I'd had these visions of being on the sofa at home and having all these cuddles and just being able to pick your baby up as a mum is the most natural thing. And I just couldn't do that. And yeah, it was just really quite heartbreaking. And even the other things like changing nappies, bathing, feeding. I couldn't just feed her. I didn't know she had a tube that went down to her stomach, and I would express my milk to then syringe into her tube, and it's just such an unnatural way, really. And I just felt guilty all the time. I felt like, oh, I can't be a mum. I'm not a mum. I'm such a useless mum. I can't even feed my own baby. That's how I felt. And it just felt so kind of unnatural, storing my milk. And I turned up to this ward with like an overnight bag, thinking I'd be staying in the hospital 1, possibly 2 nights. And I just had nothing. It's definitely equipped for babies, but there certainly isn't a space for parents, really. There's nowhere to put your bag. There's nowhere to sit down unless a chair's brought in for you to sit next to your baby. There's nowhere really to express. So you kind of express behind a kind of a screen, but there's people around, and people come around to talk to you about your baby, and you're very aware that there's others in the room, and it's
incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
Comes to mind. I think it really, when you started your story, you have that anticipation of being a new mom, and you just think you're going to go in the hospital, you're going to have your baby, and then that's you get to go home. So it's a real grief process for yourself of missing all those first with her, and not, like you said, you were there, you're her mom, you wanted to do those things, which is just, the only words that come to mind is so incredibly difficult. And you talk about all the emotional aspects that no one could really prepare for you, but again, you haven't even mentioned yourself. You told us what a difficult birth that was, and here you are trying to look presentable in a neonatal unit, after going through quite a hard physical experience for your own body and your own healing. And that just, there's just so much disconnect, isn't there, that your experience isn't working out how you wanted it to. You're still recovering, and you're still, your first big thing is you just want to be her mom. That must have been so hard.
It was difficult, and I think that people who have who their babies are in this really, really emergency situation, really, because anything can happen at any time. And I think it's almost forgotten that this woman has just been through labor, and your body's trying to recover, and yet you're not getting any sleep. You're not able to lay down and sleep. You can't kind of relax. You can't, the ward that I was on, the shower wasn't even working. So you can imagine how kind of how kind of unhygienic I felt at the time. And, you know, people don't want to go home. I didn't want to go home. I wanted to be there all of the time. I didn't want to leave her. I wanted to be there all the time. And, you know, my milk came when I was looking at her. So I wanted to express my milk next to her, and I wanted to talk to her, and I wanted to tell her that, you know, that we were there and we're here. Mummy's here, daddy's here, you know, we're here. And oh, sorry. I remember I remember you know, the machines are always beeping, so there's always some kind of beep going on. And when Rob and I spoke to her a couple of times, she reacted, and the machine started beeping, and it was just that terrifying moment of, oh my God, what have we done? And, you know, we then didn't want to talk to her because we were so scared that it was set another alarm off. And it was just another barrier to feeling comfortable just talking to her and holding her hand, because we were so scared that it would do something. And sometimes alarms would go off, and the first thing you'd think was, oh my God, is it mine? You know, is it my baby? And it was just, oh my gosh, it was so stressful, because first thing you'd think was, oh my God, is it mine? And then you realize it's not yours. So you have this big sigh of relief, but then you feel so guilty because you know that it's someone else's baby. And, you know, those machines, as I said to you guys before, you know, I still hear those machines sometimes. It's something that just never really leaves you.
What do you think, I guess, looking back at the things that maybe helped you with it, and with being in there, being in that room, you know, were there any things that you can now look back at and pinpoint for you and your husband that you think, yes, that really helped? Or, you know, as you said a little bit earlier on, that one of the midwives one of the nurses explaining what the machines were for. Were there any other sort of aspects that, you know, helped you understand or kind of gave you some comfort in such a terrifying and uncertain time?
I think the most important thing for us was knowing what was happening. So we wanted to ask questions a lot. And you think that everyone's too busy to talk to you, but actually they are there to answer your questions. That's part of their role. And including parents in the care of your baby is part of their role, and they are very happy to do it. So I think during the end of her stay, I remember asking one of the consultants if we could just sit and ask a load of questions. And she said, absolutely, come into my office at so-and-so and just ask anything you want to ask. And it was so helpful, because she wasn't then on the ward looking after all the babies. It was just us as parents talking to her about our baby. And I think that, you know, she was very happy to do that. And I wish we'd done that a bit earlier. I would say I kept everything to myself. I couldn't bear to say the words that she was unwell. So I didn't call people that I knew. I was just too kind of wrapped up, or I couldn't quite believe it was happening. It felt like almost like a nightmare that I was still kind of walking in. And Rob, my husband, rang his family and he told them, and he said in hindsight that that really helped him to process things. So I guess I would just encourage you to talk to the right people and just give a quick call. You don't need to go into details, but just say, oh my God, this is really hard, or I'm doing this, or this is happening. And it just shares the burden a little bit, even though it's still on your shoulders. By just saying it out loud, it does really help. So I guess I would say the best thing you can do is ask questions, talk to people, and if you can, somehow try to get a bit of physical rest.
Yeah.
Because like we didn't want to go home. So for the first few nights, we booked hotels around the corner because I couldn't bear to be away from her. And I know that a lot of families are not able to do that, or they have children at home, or they have people who, you know, need to go back to work, etc., etc. But you know, I was in a lot of pain. I was on antibiotics, and I just had to hobble somewhere every night to try and get some kind of rest, and then I'd be up and I'd be, you know, I guess, yeah, don't be afraid to ask for help. I remember one little incident where we'd gone to this hotel and I was expressing milk throughout the night, and I was walking to and from the hospital to put the milk in the freezer. And the lady on reception said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Oh, my baby, is in hospital and I'm taking some milk." She said, "Oh gosh, we get lots of mothers staying here. We've got a fridge here. You can just store it here with us and it'll be safe for you until the morning. I'll put this label on it and you can just come and collect it in the morning when you wake up." And I just thought, had I just said to them, "Do you have a fridge I could use?" it would have just saved me going to and from the hospital. So it's little things like that. I think people do want to help. It's just you're too afraid to ask for it.
I think
you don't know the help you need, and that's part of why we wanted to do this, Honey, didn't we? And we were like, we wish we could put some peers in, and I think some units are doing that of parents who have been there, because it is a different navigation, isn't it? It's new emotions, it's new things to do, and I think part of your story is, it was more started when you actually did get to bring Sophie home and process it all, and the level of care, that you went from having all those machines, all that support, and then they were like, "Okay, you get to go home now." And I think that's where, your story of getting help kind of started. It wasn't right away though, was it?
No, it wasn't, because we'd been transferred to a different hospital. I obviously wasn't a patient then at the hospital I gave birth in. And when we came home a few weeks later, I'd obviously missed all of the normal kind of midwifery and health visitor visits that you would get. So when people eventually did come round, they didn't know what had happened. So I remember just kind of being taught CPR from the NICU, and then they kind of said, well, it shouldn't happen again, but it could happen again. And to go home with that little information and be worried constantly that this was going to happen again it was terrifying. I mean, how did we know this was not going to happen again? And imagine actually trying to do CPR on your own baby. I mean, it's just unfathomable, really. It's too much to take on your shoulders. You can't, and we hadn't processed really what had happened. We'd just come home and we had people come into the door saying, "Oh, right, tell me what happened then. Oh, why haven't I seen you yet?" And you just think, how do you not know? And how can I start to explain what's happened to you in a kind of half an hour appointment? And it just didn't feel helpful. And it would have been really nice if someone had come to the door and said, "Oh, honey, I've read your notes. I'm so sorry about what happened. What can I do to help you? What can I answer for you?" That would have been so much better for me, rather than going over and over it every time, kind of being re-traumatized every time and getting upset and having to go over it again and again. And yeah, my mental health really, really suffered during those first few months. I was absolutely elated to bring her home. Obviously, I was so happy to bring her home, have a baby at home. I was over the moon, but I was just terrified. I was so hypervigilant. I was watching her all the time. I was making sure she was breathing all the time. Like, I'd wake up in the night sweating because I hadn't checked her in 5 minutes to see if she was breathing. It was just, I was having constant nightmares. I was having all of these flashbacks where it would take me back to something would remind me, or I would just be having this daydream, and then all of a sudden I'd get this horrible memory that would just kind of come straight at me, and it would be kind of really shocking. And I didn't know how to kind of get myself back into the real world. It was like it was really happening right there and then. And yeah, my mental health just went straight down. And she was born in the October, and by the Christmas I was really, really low. I felt like I couldn't, get through the next day. It just felt like too much of an effort. It was really overwhelming.
Do you think there was a turning point for you? You said she was born in October, and then Christmas was your lowest. Was there, looking back now, was there a moment where the support that you may have found or got, or something happened where you kind of felt that this sort of that downward spiral stopping, and you kind of felt maybe a little bit more, this is okay, I am getting there? Was there a moment like that happened for you?
Not in that period, no, but I do feel like if the midwife or the health visitor had said, yes, we're checking that baby's okay, but mum, how are you? How are you feeling? How was it for you? Are you okay? Are you getting enough sleep? It just wasn't, it was all Sophie focused, which obviously is of paramount importance, but you've
And
got parents who
to jump in,
yeah.
How is Sophie now? Sophie is...
So she's 3.5 and she does live with cerebral palsy, but she's doing amazingly well. So thank you for asking.
She's a happy, troublesome toddler.
Oh, she's so cheeky, you wouldn't believe.
So I think that people listening would have, kind of, this hugely traumatic and intense and terrifying experience. It's lovely to know that Sophie is well now.
And equally as important, this girl right
Honey.
here, Honey, is so well as well. I'm so proud of you. And you can go more to where you got help and support, because it is a lot of work, isn't it? It is. And we talk a lot about this, that I wrote down, because we really talk about this as affecting the way you parent. But if you look back, like, you had that labor, then you didn't get to see her. Then she stopped breathing in the NICU. Then you had 6 days without a diagnosis. And then you went home with her with such a high level of care. And just saying that, is just words, but you physically felt that in your body. You went home and you had this baby to care for. You went through all of that. And you noticed it affecting your mental health, because you just wanted to make sure she was okay all the time. And you said you got to about December. Was that when you went for help, or was it after that?
So after that, I was at a routine appointment, because obviously Sophie had loads and loads of appointments due to her condition. And in one of the meetings, I just broke down. I got so upset. I just couldn't hold it in anymore. And this wonderful consultant said, "Oh, are you struggling? Because there's specialist help for this. People who've been through similar things to you, there's actual specialists that will, you can talk to." And I just thought, wow, that's amazing. Yes, please, please, can I talk to somebody? And I was referred to the perinatal mental health team. And honestly, I owe my life to them. The support and the therapy that I received from them was incredible. So there are services out there. It's just knowing about them, because I'd been previously to my GP and I'd said kind of at the 6-week check, I wasn't sleeping, etc., etc. And, he didn't tell me about any services. He didn't know anything about them. And when I did go back to him, months later, I said, "Oh, I'm actually, getting therapy from the perinatal mental health team," and he didn't know about them. So it's a case of, knowing what services are out there. And it's an incredible service. I was diagnosed with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and I got the help I needed. So I do feel really, really lucky, because I know that that's not the case for everyone.
I think that's, Honey, I think that's an amazing sentiment. And again, I think we spoke about this on the last podcast, is that all of the fantastic women that we are speaking to always caveat it with, "I am so lucky." And I think that is an amazing place to get to after everything that you've been through and the trauma and the work that you've done to get yourself better. You can still say, "I am so lucky," because there are other people that couldn't do this or didn't have that. And I think that's, testament to you and the strength of your character and how you've worked to, to get yourself feeling okay. I think that's amazing, and I think that you should definitely recognize that as, in part of your journey. And I guess, you've, as Chelsea said, you've come so far and you've done so much, and now you are working to help other women and families in the same situation. But often other things that we talk about in terms of birth trauma, and things that happen during sort of that really intense period are the triggers that might take you back, unexpected and expected. And I just wonder if if you could explain maybe what those, if any, have happened for you, and how you work again with what you've learned from the perinatal mental health teams to support you in when those happen?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had 10 months of intensive therapy from the perinatal mental health team. So I had weekly and sometimes twice weekly therapy for 10 months until my daughter turned 1, which was when they discharged. But actually, that's changed to 2 years now, which is incredible. You know, I started doing research. I started thinking, you know, once I started to feel a bit better, and I was, you know, I remember my therapist saying, look, your brain doesn't know how to process trauma like this. You know, your brain, it's like this memory doesn't know where to be put in your brain. So I remember her saying, if you had a curry for dinner, your brain then puts it into a nice little slot. And if somebody asks you, oh, what did you have for dinner last night? You can just pull up that filing cabinet and say, oh, I had a curry last night. If you have a memory where it's so hard to process and your brain doesn't know where to put it, then it just kind of comes out whenever it feels like it because your brain hasn't put it in a compartment. And that really helped because I thought, actually, it's not my fault. none of the way I'm feeling is my fault. This has just happened, and this is how my brain's processing it. And, you know, all of a sudden I wasn't the only one. There were loads of people going through this. And, you know, it's something ridiculous, like 30,000 women a year get diagnosed with PTSD. And I just find that staggering. Like, why don't we talk about this? Where is this in the headline news? Where is this, you know, all the classes that you might do leading up to a birth? You know, nothing's mentioned about, you know, what if something does go wrong? Or what if your labour doesn't go as planned? Or what if, you know, you do feel depressed afterwards? You know, where's that kind of signposting? Where is the information? And, you know, there's such a stigma around kind of mental health when you're a mum. You know, you see these kind of pictures and advertisements of, oh, you know, having a baby is the most wonderful thing in the world, and you see these kind of perfect pictures. And if you're not feeling that way, then you're going to be ashamed to talk about it. You're going to feel guilty. You're going to feel like there's something wrong with you. You know, I'd look at other women in the park and think, oh, why can't I feel really happy like them? Why do I feel like this? You know, I'm a bad mum. I shouldn't be a mum. I should be, you know, should. And it's really shocking that once you find out how prevalent this is, you know, and how, you know, being a new mum or a first time mum, you know, it's such a breeding ground for mental health problems. Why are we not talking about it? And that was really frustrating for me. So I just wanted to kind of like raise awareness, really. I wanted to share my story, as hard as it is kind of sharing it. I wanted people to know that, like, this can happen, and also there is actually treatment for it, and it's very, very common. So yeah, I got involved with some charities. I got involved with my local expert by experience group, which is women who have been through mental health problems during the perinatal period. And we started, you know, we tried to raise awareness, promote the service. And from there, really, it just kind of snowballed, and it kind of became this kind of mission. And I became a bit perinatal obsessed. And I just wanted something to change and something to do and to make something better somehow. And as you know, Sophie's 3.5. It's been a really long and tough journey, but I'm in a really good place now, and I'm working for a specialist service in the NHS that looks after women who have had trauma and loss, and they have severe fear of birth and pregnancy. So it's a really kind of specialised service, and I feel really grateful to be a part of it, and it's a real passion for me. So I do feel like I'm in a really good place. Yes, of course I do have triggers.
You are in such a good place, and you are helping women, and
I feel like this service is extremely grateful to have you.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, what the way that you have spoken about everything that happened is genuinely inspirational. And I think that, you know, the fact that you say that why aren't we talking about this? Why isn't it talked about? And that's exactly why you said yes to talking to us today about it, because, you know, Chelsea and I both know through work and personal experiences that we've had these conversations as well. You know, why did no one tell me this? Or why do I feel ashamed or embarrassed to say how I'm feeling, or to say why, you know, exactly as you said, I don't look like those glossy pictures with a cup of tea in one hand, the laundry folded, and a bouncing baby on my knee.
Exactly.
That's not the normal, and the normal should be talked about, and the realities are. And so I think, the fact that you're doing that now and helping so many women is incredible. And I wonder, if there's anything you or Chelsea would just sort of like to reflect on and finish on for the last part, for maybe someone that is listening or that has been through something similar, has had birth trauma, or knows someone and wants to know sort of the first steps of getting support and where they can go to do that.
I'll definitely let Honey come in there because it's her own experience, and I think you're best placed to say where to get support. But I will bring you back again, me writing down notes, because I wish I could take everything you say and carry it around with me. But you said that, and this was a big part of my recovery journey, getting help separates some of the worst symptoms from who you are. And I think that's so important, because it's so easy to just sit there and think, this is just who I am. This is why I can't be like other people. And you almost think you're a bad mom. But getting help allows you that time and that space and something for yourself to be able to sit there and have someone else say, no, your body and your behaviors are from this, this, and this. And it was, all that it really came down to was you were just wanted to protect her, and you just wanted to be that best mom, but you were battling with the experience, with everything that came with it and your expectations. So I think my reflection on that is everyone's worth going for support, and the transformation it can give new parents, because it really reassures them that they are normal, they are okay. They just need someone else to stand in front of them and really show them that mirror and say, you really are a great parent, and this isn't who you are. You're, if that makes sense. But that's really what I took from those last words you said, Honey.
That makes perfect sense, Chelsea. 100%. I was kind of nodding and felt teary-eyed at all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say the best thing that I learned was to talk, whether that be to yourself, to your partner, to your friend, to your sister, to groups, support groups. That's the best thing I could have done, because otherwise you hold that stigma, you hold that shame, you hold that guilt, and that's so unhealthy. Let's talk about the injuries we sustained. Let's talk about what it feels like as a woman to have had a baby, and your body looks different, you feel different, you have a different identity. Just having a baby in itself is such a life-changing thing for anybody, regardless of if something goes wrong or you go through a birth trauma or similar. It's such a life-changing thing, and we just don't talk about how hard it is. We don't talk about, oh, this happened, and I wet myself, or all these little things. We just don't talk about it, and I just wish we could just be a lot more open. It would just be so helpful if, instead of kind of comparing each other, we could just chat to each other and just be completely open and honest, because then you build a connection. And that's how I built a connection with these incredible women in this group. We've all been through something horrible, and we've come out the other end, and we can talk about it, and it's normal, and there's no judgment and there's no shame. It's just, I think the worst thing in the world for me was just feeling completely and utterly alone. I was so isolated, and I thought I was the only one, and therefore I couldn't talk about it. And actually, I've become the total opposite, where you can't stop me talking about it. And just a couple of kind of reflections and some support. I just really want to mention the Birth Trauma Association. They've got a fantastic website. They've got help on hand. They've got volunteers. They have support groups online, and I can't sing their praises enough. Also, Make Birth Better. I'm a champion for them now, and they have a brilliant website with all sorts of support. I joined a specific NICU support group, talking to other mums. Some of their mums were still on the NICU, some had just been sent home, some had been kind of years later. Also Bliss Baby Charity. There are services out there, and if you join some of these groups. I know it can be daunting. I know it can be scary, but if you just join, turn your camera off, don't say anything, the more you do it, the more confident you'll get. You'll just hear that these are just normal humans, you know, and they've been through something, and you're just here to talk about it. Trust me, it helps massively. And that was a really, really big part of my recovery.
Wow, I feel like you nothing more to add there, is there?
For president. It's just amazing, and such great support that you've offered people. Yeah, I just feel incredibly lucky that I know you, and that you're doing the work you are now, because it's going to be so helpful. And you know, people listening to this podcast might just go start those conversations, because you know, they hear us talking about it.
I hope so. And you know, it will change who you are. It will change the way you parent. It will change the way you look at life, you know, and that's okay, because this experience has shaped you. If you can talk about it and you can recover, then you know what could be better. You've had this experience, but actually you can be a better parent for it and a better person for it. So yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Honey. That was thank you for, as I said, being so brave and so honest and so inspirational with everything that you have shared with us today. And all of the organisations that you mentioned, we will link them to this podcast, so that anybody listening can find them, look them up, and access the help and support that they offer. So thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.